Hello and welcome to part 6 of the Tropical Terrain series. This is David Ward. And when last I left you, we had just finished up creating, the rocks and everything, and then we created the little placeholders for our higher resolution, higher polygon count objects. So all that being done, let's go ahead and jump in and start working on the actual landscape itself. So we got all our library assets created for the landscape. Let's make the landscape now. So let's go back to the first layer and let's grab all these guys and put them on their own layer. Let's put them way over here. Let's put them over on the fourth layer. There's nothing over there right now, so let's go ahead and drop them over there. Okay. And now we're going to use one more plugin. And again, if you watch the island tutorial that I made on Blender Cookie, you will be familiar with this already. We're going to use the ANT landscape generator. It's right there. I've already got it turned on. Speaking of turning things on, let me turn my screencast keys on, which is also a plugin, by the way, if you want to make your own tutorials. It's right here in the add-ons as well. Just go to screencast, one of the default plugins that are included. And someone asked, I saw in my YouTube comments, someone was asking if the sapling generator was part of the default package, and yes, it is. If you have Blender 2.63, which is what I'm using here, it's part of the default plugin package. So anyways, since we have our landscape generator turned on, let's go ahead and Shift A, and we're going to come down here to Mesh, Landscape. There we go. And once you do that, you'll get some settings pop up over here on your left side. I'm going to go ahead and over here and hit N so it turns off the properties, so I have a little bit more elbow room here. And let's just play with some of these settings here. Right now the mesh size is 2, which is covering 2 square Blender units. And I want to make that quite a bit higher, so let's make it, I'm going to make it 12. Maybe even bigger. Let's make it 15. Okay. And now we'll mess with the height settings. Come down here. And right now the plateau is set to 1.0. So if we change the height to anything higher than 1, it's going to flatten it out there at one level there. So let's make that a little bit higher. Let's make it 5. And then we'll bring this height down to about 4. And now we need to mess with some of these other settings up here. Let's change the noise size right now to, let's make that 3. And it'll make it a little more jaggedy. And the dimensions, that kind of messes. It kind of adjusts the fractal version of the noise, fractal size. So if we make it smaller, you can see it adds more smaller detail, but if we make it bigger, it kind of smooths it out. So let's make that 2, and then we'll make the noise size here, let's make it a little bit bigger, make it 3. And that's rising a little too high for me right now. I just kind of want a almost a flat landscape, but with some, subtle, little hills and valleys here and there. So let's change the height down to about 3 instead. And then I'd also like to have some different shapes to the hills and everything. So I'm going to go random seed and just going to play with that until I find something I like. Everything seems to be a little too big still yet. So let's change the noise size to, let's make that 5. Spread it out. And you know what? I'm going to set the dimension back down to 1 just so we have a little bit more detail there in some of the little rough areas. So keep going with the seed. Might even need to change the height back down a little bit. Let's make that 2 now. Yeah, that's looking a little bit better. Make the noise size a little bit bigger. And I think I'm going to go with that. Let's go with that one. You can pick whatever one you want. Keep going with it. Play with it and find something that you like. But I'm just going to go ahead and go with this one here. So since we have that set up, we can go ahead and click over here in here, and if the settings over here disappear, no big deal. We've got it set pretty well the way we want. So since we have the shape set, let's go ahead and start working on the material for it. So let's click on our material tab right there, create a new one, and we're going to call this one Sandy. And if you notice, we lost our adjustment controls over here, which, like I said, is no big deal since we're pretty well done with it. If you want to change it up, just delete that one, start over, or go into the sculpt mode and kind of just adjust it, or edit mode and push and pull the vertices with maybe some proportional editing turned on and off. or turned on, and then you can, you know, play with it, make it nice and smooth, or whatever. Anyway, so sandy, and sand isn't really shiny, so let's set the specular level way down. Let's make that 0.1, and the hardness also to 10. So it's 0.1 and then 10. And let's go ahead and turn on our monkey head so it'll give a little bit better representation. And we'll go to our texture settings now, create a new one. It's going to be clouds. And let's go ahead and expand the color settings there, turn on ramp. And I'm going to set the black color, black alpha, all the way up to 100% alpha, or non-alpha, I guess, opaque. And let's make it kind of just a grayish brown, tannish color, a little bit darker. And then set the white to a little bit lighter, grayish tan. Maybe a little more yellow to it. Okay. And now we're going to come down here to the cloud settings. Go ahead and set it to hard and change the type to Voronoi F1. And you can see it's kind of a roundish, you know, individual grainy textures. So let's set the preview here to both so we can kind of see what's going on there. And we can see automatically now that the noise setting is too big. So let's collapse these guys and set the size down to make it, let's make it 0.005. And that'll make it quite a bit smaller. And I can see now it's probably going to be too dark. Let's go ahead and take a peek through our camera. Adjust that down a little bit. Maybe zoom in some. Let's take a peek render there. And it's looking okay, but it's still a little bit big. We don't want to see the individual grains this far back. So let's escape out of there. Grab this and let's make it even smaller. Let's try 0.001. And then it's a little bit dark, so let's brighten it up just a little bit. Especially this dark area here. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. Go ahead and render it out. Okay, that looks quite a bit better, I think. Okay, so go ahead and escape out of there. And if you notice, our landscape there is a little jaggedy, so let's give it a subdivision surface. There we go. Just set to render 1 subdivision, just to smooth it off. And we'll render it out one more time. You can see it's a little bit smoother now, so that's good. Okay, now one more thing I want to do with the sand texture is give it a little bit of bump, and actually we're going to do that with the current texture. Go ahead and come down here to influence and set normal, and we see it starts adding some roughness to it. It's a little bit too much, so let's make it a little bit lower, maybe 0.5. Okay, and now let's do a quick render there, see what that looks like. Okay, it's not bad. Maybe a little bit too much. So let's escape out. Let's make that half that, 0.25, so half of a half. Okay. And then we're going to create one more texture here, and this is going to be for like an overall kind of sand dunes type of thing there. So we'll create a new one, and go ahead and set the color ramp. Go ahead and make that 100% opaque. And we're going to set the cloud settings. Go ahead and make that hard as well. And there's a couple of different things I want to do now. Or there's one thing I want to do now, but there's a couple of different ways to do it. Now what I want to do is make, right now, if I set this to be the bump map, which we'll go ahead and do, come down here to geometry, set normal. You can see, and go and turn off color there so we can see what we're doing. Everything that's white is going to be raised up, and everything that's black is going to be, you know, pushed down. So right now we have some bumpiness to this, but it's not the way I want, because it's the rounded white parts that are coming up. I want those to go down. So there's two ways I can do that. One, the quickest, easiest way is just to set this to -1. Change it to a negative value. You can see those peaks now are sharper because they're the black ones coming up a little sharper. So you can do that, or if you want to do something different and not mess with negative numbers, you can just always go to color and just swap these two sides, like so. It'll do pretty much the same thing. So we'll go ahead and do that, and go ahead and give it a test render again. And now you can see some little wind-blown parts of the sand in there. So that's one way to do that. Now, I'm not really liking the way it's being mapped on here. It doesn't really look that natural. So I'm going to go ahead and escape out of the render there. And even though I said in part 5, I think that I don't want to use any texture maps at all. I'm not going to, but I'm still going to unwrap the UV coordinates of this ground plane. So let's tab into edit mode, hit U, and we're going to project from view to the bounds. And if we separate this window over here and look at our UV image editor, close out the render result, you can see that we now have, if I deselect that, we now have all of the faces in here applied directly to the bounds of our UV coordinates map there. So if you wanted to create a texture map, you could, but like I said, we're going to go all procedural textures in this tutorial series. So since we have the UV coordinates set up now, we can map these texture maps a little bit better onto our ground. So let's go ahead and collapse these guys, and under mapping, instead of generated, we're going to go UV and do the same thing on the one up there, UV. And now if we look at our render, you can see it's not that great, but if we render again, now that we've changed that, it's going to render quite a bit more nicely, a little bit nicer. Okay, now I'd kind of like those little divots, little hills and valleys to be a little more prominent and a little bit smaller, or not necessarily smaller, but a little bit more detail to them. So let me go and escape that, or close that out, and let's grab that second one there, go back to our cloud settings, and add some more depth to it, maybe about to 6, and let's make the size about 0.15 instead of 0.25, and then let's give it a little bit more depth there on the normals. Give it 1.25. So now we'll look at it again and render out one more time. And you can see there's quite a bit more detail there. Okay, so we've got our ground pretty well created. Let's go and escape that out. And I want to start adding the rocks and flowers and foliage and everything. So the way we do that is, first off, we need to create some vertex groups so we can kind of distribute them and have a little bit more control of their distribution across the island, or across the landscape. So let's create 3 different vertex groups there. Let's grab this first one. We're going to call this one stones. And then the next one we're going to call flowers. And then finally, foliage. If I can spell it correctly. There we go. Okay, so let's grab the stones and let's go to our weight paint. And one thing that's going to make this go a little bit faster, if we go to our modifiers and go ahead and turn off the subsurf view in our 3D viewport here. It'll still render the smoothness, but we have it turned off now in the viewport, so we can do things a little bit smoother as far as working with it. So we're in our vertex group, weight paint. So we're drawing. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. Set our radius up a little bit bigger and the strength a little higher. And this is going to be the stones, so let's just maybe set the strength a little lower so it's more like an airbrush technique there. So let's just paint in here. And as I'm sure you're familiar, the blue areas means there's going to be 0 weight painted, and then the red areas is 100% weight painted, and all the colors in between is just a variation between 0 and 100%. So we'll just paint that in there like so, just random, just however you want to paint them in there. Flowers, they're going to be kind of bunched together, so instead of just painting a big swatch, I'm just going to kind of paint little sections like so. Maybe one over there. Okay. Now foliage, it's kind of just going to be just distributed kind of just randomly. Let's give it a little bit more heaviness here on the left side. As you can see, that's kind of a more of a rough terraneous, I don't know. So we'll give it a little bit more heaviness for the actual trees and everything. And maybe this smaller side is kind of sloping down towards, say we're on an island, and this is kind of sloping down towards the water, so it starts thinning out there. Okay, so we got our stones, our flowers, and our foliage. All right, back to object mode. Now we're ready to start adding our individual items that we worked so hard to create to our land. So let's go to our particle settings, add a new one, and let's just go ahead and name this one stones. And then we'll go ahead and put this in here, stone settings, okay? And it's going to be a hair type. Go ahead and check the advanced tab there, and we'll set the number for now. We'll just set it down to 50, so it'll be a little easier to work with here. And come down here to render and choose group, and we're going to click in here and choose stones, and that adds our stones. Now we need to come down here to our vertex groups and go ahead and set the stones vertex group so we can get them distributed how we painted them on there. Now if you zoom in, you'll notice that they're all rotated onto their sides. They're not rotated correctly. So we can mess with this and come up to rotation and check that. And we could say global y-axis, and now they're rotated correctly. But they're all pretty much the same direction. And we definitely want some variation there. But if we change the randomness, it's going to kind of spin them around in just a haphazard way, and it's not going to be very realistic. So the way we fix that is, from what I gather, the reason this is occurring is because most other 3D programs like 3D Studio Max or Maya, their global orientation is on the vertical axis, it's Y. On the horizontal axis, it's X, and on the to and fro axis is Z. Blender has them different, where the to and fro is Y and the vertical is Z. So when it adds these particles to our object, it's kind of going with the default, or the other way, where Z is the depth rather than the vertical. So what we need to do is let's go back to the layer that has our stones on it. And right now, they're being mapped onto well, essentially the Z-axis, which is the vertical axis. So what we need to do is change them to Blender's Z-axis. So let's tab in here, select everything, go to our side view, and rotate them so they'll be, pointed in the Z-axis that the particle system is using, if that makes any sense at all. So let's just do that to all of these guys. Grab this final one here. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and do that with the flowers as well. Now, one thing that the sapling generator does is it looks fine in the viewport here, but it might have rotated it a little off, a little oddly, or maybe even scaled a little odd. So we can go Alt-R, and it'll clear out any rotations. You can see it did have it rotated a little differently. And if we Alt-S, it did have it scaled a little differently. So let's do the same thing on this group of flowers. Alt-S, Alt-R, and that'll clean them out. And then we can go into side view and select everything. Scale it back down to where it needs to go, and then rotate it to be correct on the right axis. Okay, we'll do this on the flowers as well. I guess on the other flowers. Okay, so now we got everything in this scene pretty well rotated back. So if we go back to our first scene, remember we set that to global Y. Now it's pointing towards the back, rather than if we go global Z, now everything's pointed up. But we don't want global Z, really. We want to, because that's going to make everything pointing straight up or straight down. What we'd rather want is have it situated on the curve and settings of the plane, or on the ground itself. So instead of global Z, let's go to, we can either do normal or velocity hair. So let's go velocity hair, and then, well, one thing we can do, normal, it gives you the ability to give it some more randomness here, to rotate it like in any axes. If you go to velocity here, you can only rotate it around its central axis. You can only spin it around, basically. So kind of depending on what you want to do with that. On the stones, I'm just going to have them on the velocity here. So let's set the randomness all the way up and the phase all the way up. Okay, so now we have our rocks distributed around there. They're all about the same size, which we probably need to adjust that as well. So let's go to our physics. And right now the size is set to 0.05. Let's set that to 0.1. It'll make them quite a bit bigger. But now if we set random size, we can get quite a bit different variation in the size of the rocks, stones. Okay, so let's look through our camera, see what that's looking like. Not too bad. Some of these stones are coming up a little too high there over the little hills and valleys. So let's set the number up a little bit maybe, and then we can play with the seed to get it distributed a little bit better. Maybe I'll set the number lower. Let's make it 30. And then we'll play with the seed. There we go. I like that one. Let's do a test render real quick, see what that's looking like. Okay, zoomed in a little bit by accident. There we go. Okay, we can see now that they're laying on the ground nicely, but the texture pattern on the rocks, stones themselves is way too deep. So let's escape out there and let's go to our third layer with the rocks. Grab the material first, then the materials, or then the textures, and then we'll come down here under stone bump. Let's go ahead and, let's collapse that one and that one. Normal is set to -0.75, which is too much, so let's change that to maybe 0.25, and that'll be a little bit better. And set the clouds, let's set the size up to 0.35. So now, if we render, it should look quite a bit better. Actually, we're on the wrong layer, so let's go back to our first layer. You can see that looks quite a bit better. Okay, so that's all our rocks. And you know what? I'm kind of thinking the land here is a little too tall. Click in here. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to scale it down a little, flatten it down a little bit. So there we go. Okay, so now let's do the same thing for our flowers. Go over here, create a new particle system, flowers. Go and call this one flower settings. There we go. And it's going to be here also. And go ahead and check the advanced tab. And this one we're going to set to 50 as well for now. Come down here to render, change that to group, choose the flowers. Okay. And since we already rotated them when we rotated the rocks, we don't have to go in there and do that. So we can go ahead and set the rotation. Go ahead and check that checkbox. And on this one, I'm going to go ahead and choose normal because I want to make some of them lean over just a little bit instead of just spinning on their axis. I just want some of them to lean just a little bit. So we'll set the phase up and the randomness up. Okay, so now they're a little bit too small. Let's look through our camera so we can get a better idea of what they look like. So let's set the random size again to 0.1, and the random size a little bit higher, and maybe even make the size a little bit bigger than that. Let's try to make that 0.2. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, now one thing we have under our render tab here for our group is we can choose the whole group, which is just gonna do each flower. You know, it's gonna essentially duplicate the group an even amount. So right now we can only see, or actually it's kind of the way they're oriented in the 3D space there is how it's going to duplicate them. So we don't want that. So we want it to pick them randomly. There we go. And let's have them use a count. I would like to have, for example, a 3-to-1 ratio of the red flowers versus the purple flowers. So just come down here and say red flowers 1. Let's set that up to 3. And say you wanted a 3-to-2 ratio. You'd choose the purple flowers, make that 2. And that'll give them the ratio for that. You can pick and choose a little bit better. So we got our flowers in there. Let's give a few more. Right now we have 50. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit more. Make it 80. So there we go. So let's go ahead and save this while we're at it. External hard drive's got to wake up. There it goes. Okay, go ahead and render out that. See what this is going to look like with the flowers and rocks. I'll pause recording so you don't have to sit here through the whole shebang. Okay, there we go. Now we have our flowers in the scene as well as the rocks. Now one thing you might notice, as I obviously can see, our our bump maps on our rocks are all kind of skewed out. Like right here, for example, there it's all lines. Now, I'm not sure what causes that, but I was able to fix it. Just go file, save your scene, and then just start a new scene, reload it, and then open your scene back up. And then if we render now, those should be fixed. So I'll go ahead and pause recording. We'll come right back. Okay, and you can see that that's working properly now. Like I said, I don't know what causes that. It's just a small bug or glitch in the program, I guess. I don't know. Okay, so that we get an idea of what that's looking like. So go and escape out. And now we're going to use our placeholders. So let's go to our fourth layer over here. And remember, the rocks and the flowers we had to rotate. So we're going to have to do that with these guys as well. So let's tab into edit mode, select everything, rotate it 90 degrees, set it back on its origin point. Same thing in here. Rotate it around. Okay. Remember, the orange dot is the origin point, not necessarily the center of the scene like the 3D cursor is at. It's going to be that orange dot. Okay, so we got all those. Now, having done that, we're going to have to do it on the actual high-res versions of the plants as well. So let's go to that second layer that everything's on. And like I said with the flowers, the sapling generator doesn't really give you an accurate, perfect illustration of which way each plant is facing after you're done. So let's just select everything. We're going to go Alt-S to clear out any size. You can see even on my fern that I created, that's probably my fault for not doing it in edit mode, but the size was off there. But the main tree there was too big. And now if we hit Alt-R, you can see a lot of them were rotated incorrectly. So we're going to grab the tree itself. We're going to Shift-S, put the cursor to selected, so it puts it there at the base. Tab into edit mode, select everything. Oh, one thing, since I closed that out and opened it back up, the screencast was turned off, so we'll go ahead and start that back up. Okay. So we'll go ahead and scale that down. Actually, we need to hit the period button, so we're scaling and rotating around the 3D cursor, which is there at the origin now. So we'll scale that down to about the size it needs to be, about like so. Okay. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and grab that. Let's go ahead and rotate him 90 degrees so he's on the right. Oops. So he's on the right axes there when we put him on the terrain. Okay, so we'll grab the palm tree there. Select everything, and now I'm going to go Control Comma, so we're not rotating around the 3D cursor anymore. Actually, we still are Control Comma. There we go. Oh, tab into edit mode. Okay, there we go. I was still in object mode. That's why I was rotating around its origin instead of its whole space. Okay, there we go there, and let's grab our shrubbery, or it's not the shrubbery, I guess it's the fern. Scale that down a little bit. Okay, now the shrubbery. Every time I hear shrubbery, I think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I require a shrubbery. Anyways, scale that up just a bit. Okay, and finally the grass. And let's scale that up a little bit too. Okay, so everything's all situated there. And now let's go back to the layer that has all our placeholders. Select all of those guys and go Control G. And we're creating a new group for them. And we're going to call this foliage. Foliage, there we go. Now back to, running out of time. It's already 30 minutes into this. I better hurry up. Okay, so grab our land there and create one more particle system. We'll call this one foliage, of course. Change this to foliage settings. Okay. And change that to hair. And again, just check the advanced tab, give it 50 for now. Come down to render and set it to group. And we're going to say foliage. There we go. And since we rotated them already through the proper axes, we can set rotation And I'm going to do this one the same as I did with the flower, set it to normal so we can give some of them a little bit of a lean, a little bit tilt. Give it phase of 1 and randomness of 1. And now we'll go ahead and look through our camera. We see they're all way too small. So down here under physics settings, let's go ahead and set that to 0.1. Maybe even higher than that. Let's try 0.2. Yeah, that's probably more correct. And just give them some random size there. Okay. And let's see. That's all set. Let's come back under render settings like we did with the flowers. Pick random and use a count. Now this time there's going to be quite a bit different numbers. The grass is going to cover a lot more than anything else. So let's go ahead and set that to 50. And then the bushes, there's going to cover quite a bit too, but not as much as the grass. We'll set that to 20. And then the ferns, make that 10. And then the tree, the normal tree, I'd like to have a fewer of those than the palm trees. So let's set that to, we'll give that 3, and we'll set the palm trees to 5. Okay, so now we have 50, 20, or 50 plus 20, 70, 83, 88. So we need at least a number of 88 here, so we're encompassing all of the objects that we want. But, of course, 88 is not going to be enough, so let's just run that number quite a bit more. Let's make it an even 250. And then, well, honestly, that looks not bad just from the get-go. But let's play with the seed settings, see if we can get a little bit better distribution. Oh, one thing I forgot to do with the flowers, I did it with the stones, but with the flowers, we need to set the vertex group to the flowers. And then also the new foliage one with the foliage settings. There we go. Okay, so now we can mess with the, all the way up here. Now we can mess with the seed and play with that. Okay, so I think I like that one. Let's do a quick test render so we can just see what it might look like before we go in and try to render out the high resolution version. I'll go ahead and pause recording while it's rendering. Be right back. Okay, and here we go. We got a little bit of a representation of what our scene might look like once we get the high resolution versions in there. These are all going to be palm trees. These are going to be the normal trees. These will be the bushes, the ferns, and each one of these little circles on the ground will be our grass. And as you can see, the bump map on our stones is incorrect yet again, but like I said, just close it out, open it back up, should be good. Or you might even just be able to save it and try it again. But anyways, so you can see this took a little over a minute to render. Now when I swap out the low-res versions with the high-res versions, we're going to see quite a bit of a drastic difference. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick just so you can see the difference there and how much more useful the placeholders will be. So a minute and 7, so let's go ahead and close that out and go to our placeholders layer and go ahead and change each of these mesh data to the higher versions. Go ahead and look at this a little bit better angle. Fern high, grass high, and bush high. Okay, so now if we look through our camera, boom, we have all that distributed like it should be. Okay, and if we look through our render, we'll pull it up over here, you can see that it is, well, what's going on here? My computer's acting silly. Okay, zoom out a little bit. Since we have those high resolution meshes in there, it's slowing everything down. So that's another good thing for the placeholders that helps your computer not get bogged down. So I'll just go ahead and minimize that. And like I said, I'll go ahead and render this and pause recording, and we'll come back and see how long that took. So go ahead and hit F12, bring our render screen back up there, zoom in. Okay, so we'll be right back. Okay, and there we go. That one finished rendering. As you can see, it looks pretty good. The rocks are still doing the weird non-correctness there. But it took almost 9 minutes rather than just a little over 1 minute. It took 9 times as long almost to render that out with the higher resolution meshes. So, like I said, the placeholders can save a lot of time when you're just doing test renders and stuff. So, I'm going to escape out there, and I'm going to go ahead and swap those back to the low-res versions, because in part 7, we're going to, where am I at here? Palm low. We're going to mess with some more scene settings, and we'll need to render out a few times. It'll be a lot faster if we just use the low-res versions. And that is bush. There we go. Okay. So, like I said, in part 7, we're going to put some mist in our scene, give it a nice depth, a little bit more depth, and we'll throw a sky in the background and mess with some focal points there with the camera, put a little bit of blurriness to the background using the node editor. So that's going to be it for part 6. Hopefully this one didn't run on too awful long, 36 minutes nearly. But anyways, that's going to be it for part 6, and I'll catch you in part 7.